Hi, I'm Arlene Newman, and welcome to my Zoom class. We're going to be painting my holiday buck today. This will be a video in two parts. We'll take a break at lunchtime, and then we'll have the second half of the class. So, um, just so that you know, when I send it out to you as the video, you'll have two videos to look at. And you just take the link and copy and paste it, or click the link, and it will take you to the video. So, in case you don't finish up or you weren't able to make the class, you can see the complete videos. So let's get started. This is my canvas painting. I've just put it in this little frame to show you how nice he looks framed, but just so that I'm going to be using just the panel to show you because it's a little bit easier for me to hold. So just so that you know that. And if you have any questions, you're going to go to aarthouse@aol.com. If you have any concerns, you can email me and I will answer. And please go to my website also, www.arlenenewman.com. It's not hard to remember that one. There's a lot of my artwork on there for sale. I have supplies. And I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what I used to paint our little dear friend here. And I'll give you a close-up of him so you can see all the fun details. And we had a little computer trouble, or camera trouble. The camera stopped working, so I was going to be painting on its surface and the camera shining down on it. Well, the camera died. So I'm painting on an easel today, and I'll pull that as close as I can so you can actually see much more of the details. But until I get a new camera or get this one fixed, this is the way I'm going to have to do it. Okay, we are going to be using Heritage Multimedia Paints. Oh, and see, I knew this was going to be fun. Sorry. I have an easel here that is usually just stationary and I moved it around. So now let me lock that in place. Sorry. That was something, right? Okay. Back leg has to be locked. There. Okay. So anyway, the paints we're going to be using are Heritage Multimedia paints. These paints come in a tube like this, and I have mixed them into what is called globals. Now, globals make the paint stay wet longer, so you can do a lot of blending techniques, like what you'll see in the background and a lot of the areas for shading and highlighting. There's no side loading involved in this painting. So this is the tubes, and I mix them into globals. To do that, you squeeze the paint out into a jar. The jar must be airtight and watertight. Bead jars from the craft store will not work because they get air in there and the paint dries up within weeks, and you ruin and lose all your paint. So you squeeze the paint into the jar, and you're going to take your extender, which is here. Okay, this is your Heritage extender, and you squeeze some of that into there. You stir it up, and you try to keep it to the consistency of chocolate pudding, and that will help you remember chocolate pudding. Everybody loves that. Stir it up, leave the jar off at night, and leave it open for 24 hours. The water has then evaporated out in the 24 hours because all acrylics have water in them, and they have to in order to make them into jars and bottles. So the water comes out, you've put extender in, that's your new water, and now after 24 hours you can put the lid on and you can paint. But if you add water back in by rinsing your brush in between, adding water, it will turn it back to acrylic. This is acrylic. This is called multimedia paints because you can do three things with this. You can paint straight out of the tube as an acrylic. You can add the extender and it will paint like an oil paint. And you can use, okay, now I just put it down here so I find it. You can use what they call watercolor medium. It's a little amber color. And if you put the watercolor medium in the paint, you can stir it up. It will paint like a watercolor. So you can do three things. It's called multimedia paints. It's not, it's a resin-based paint. The other acrylics are not. So I don't mix the two. I've painted a background with the craft paints and then painted the good paints over it, which is fine because I had over 356 bottles of paint to use up, and I did use them for undercoating. But these are the heritage paints. Now, I know some of you are not using them. You're using the craft paints. I would suggest you use an extender. I use the extender that goes with the brand. I don't use this for other paints, and you probably have Deco Art paints or one similar, and they make an extender to keep the paint wet a little longer. So you can use that. And I'll tell you how to apply it and when to use it. But these paints, I've mixed them all up. They all have no water in them. There's no water in these jars, only extender. So they won't dry as fast. The paints will stay good for a good long while. If you need directions, if you have the globals or the heritage paints and you would like to turn them into globals, send me an email. Remember, that's my email. Send me an email and I'll send you the step-by-step directions how to turn your paints from the tubes into globals. And that's the one that will paint like an oil. Straight out of the tube is an acrylic. And it's harder to do these techniques with just acrylic. So that's why the extender is a big part of this. Okay, we are going to start working on our background. Now, I've had you do a base coat, and I also asked you to do a skim coat. Whenever I paint on a canvas, this is my personal preference. I like a gesso or this is a little thicker. This is called texture medium. And I use the texture medium and a palette knife and I skim coat it. It goes on like a big, thick, creamy blob, and I lay it flat and I use my palette knife to skim it. Now I do this to fill in all the little nooks and crannies in a canvas. If you have wood that's not real good and you want to fill some holes and whatever, this will work also. So I've skim coated and then I put one base coat of our background color. We will be putting our background on first so that we do all this nice blending techniques. And I just wanted you to have a base to start with. So I've mixed up my paint. The mixture is your titanium white plus raw umber plus yellow oxide. Now those names might sound unfamiliar to you. So I've made a little card here to show you the colors that we're going to be using. The naphthol red, burnt umber. This is yellow oxide. It's very similar to yellow ochre. I'm sure you've heard of that color. This is our pine green, titanium white, raw umber, black, burnt sienna if you have it. It doesn't come in the 12-piece starter set. And when people buy these starter sets, this is not one of the colors. But you can mix the burnt umber with a little red and you'll get the burnt sienna. So either way, I'll show you how to mix it. Ultramarine blue, Hansa yellow, and raw sienna. And this is our base coat that we are going to use as our background right now. Okay, so this is a just a sample. I know some of you are converting it to your paints because you don't want to try these paints. that's fine. Use what you have. And these are the colors we're using. They're all pure pigment, so they're nice and bright. So you will get really nice colors. Okay, so I'm using this is a Fusion Filbert. These brushes, the Fusion line is made for the working with the global paints so that they work like oils. The bristles are a little bit firmer, but then you have this beautiful tip. These are synthetic, so they're not expensive, but the tip works just like a sable. So you can do real soft blending and soft techniques. So I like to use a filbert. This is a good sized brush. And then when we get into cutting in between the antlers, you can drop down in size to maybe a 6 or an 8 filbert, and then you can bring the paint in between. But we're going to go around and I'm going to show you how we're going to do this, painting. Now, I've coated the board already. So what we're doing is we're reapplying the color. Okay, so you're reapplying. You want to think thick and creamy paint when you use this because we want it to stay wet. The minute you spread it and thin it out, your paint will start to dry. So we are going to do this upper corner right up in here with nice, thick, creamy paint. Okay, and I'll take my smaller brush and I'll place a little bit of this color in between. We don't, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one major step. This is something I always do. Before you start, the best way to save your line drawing is to take your burnt umber. Now that's an acrylic paint we're going to use. So I take a little bit of my burnt umber and it has been mixed into the with the extender to make globals. So now I'm going to put water drops in my puddle and we are going to brush sketch our deer. I started to see the pattern and I said, uh-oh, I'm going to cover that. So that's what reminded me. This is the first step I do after I've traced my design on. I brush sketch my lines with burnt umber. And this is burnt umber mixed with water. This is the only time I'm going to ask you to use water, is to make sure we don't lose this little pattern. Okay, so you can see this is called brush sketch. And you mix it with water so you hold on to your pattern. This is very quick and simple. It's a sketch. It's not a gorgeous drawing. All your painting that you do from now on will cover this. Okay, I know in kindergarten they asked you to stay in the lines. Well, we're not going to do that. We are going to paint over these lines because we don't want to see this. So just take some burnt umber. If you're using globals, add water to it. If you're using regular paint, still add water to it. We're going to thin it down so it will, you just need to see this because the thick paint will start covering it. Okay, and I did not do the background twigs and berries. I just put on my main elements. There are some holly leaves in here I don't want to lose. So I'm just doing a quick sketch. There's some stars in here I don't want to lose because I'll forget they're there. And another holly leaf here. Little star. So you can see this takes a few minutes, but by the time we're done, it will be dry. Here's my cap for my Santa hat. We have a little tassel here, the ball. I'm going to line the ears. There's a couple lines inside the ears. They're not completely outlining it, but it gives us the thickness of the ear. I put those in. Anything that you can freehand, you don't have to put in if you like freehanding. But if you're not familiar with freehanding, you can just follow my lines. And we're going to going to paint this little deer. Okay, we have a couple holly leaves down here. A star. Okay, we're going to find his face. Take your time with the face and the eyes. That's important. The rest can be very sketchy and quick. But anytime you're doing a portrait, whether it be an animal or a child or any kind of people, you take your time with the face, getting the proportions correctly, because once you start painting, it's hard to correct after you've got a pattern on there. Okay, his little muzzle, his nostrils. Gonna do his eye. I want to know where that eye is. Okay, so that is my, you'll have to stop the video, catch up with me on that part, get all those in. I'm not going to put the twigs and I'm not going to put the leaves and berries. They're going to be filler and we'll work with that later. But just get that much as a brush sketch. Now that will be easier for you to see. And when I start putting the thick paint in, we won't lose our pattern because it's very easy to paint over it. And if you do paint over it, it's not hard. I'm going to refresh, just make sure my paint is wet up here. Just refreshing with a little wet paint. Okay, now if I do cover over, I can always just take my finger and brush a little away and I can still see my pattern. So it's a really neat trick to keep your pattern as brush sketching. All right, so now we have a little wet area, this little corner. Now, when I streaked this design, you can see it's not all this light color. That's our background. Now I'm going to take some of the burnt umber. You'll want to hold a paper towel in your hand, like so, because as you change colors, you're going to be pinch wiping. So I'm going to streak this color right into this. Okay, I'm going to keep it light in the center, but I streaked a little burnt umber in there. See, I'm wiping my brush, squeezing, pulling the paint. It stays in the paper towel. Now I'm going to take a little bit of raw umber, which is a little bit darker. Now, the difference between raw umber and burnt umber. Raw umber has a little touch of black in it. They're both browns. And the way I remember burnt umber is when you think of burn, I always get a sunburn and I get really red. And there is red paint in your burnt umber. So when you think of burnt, you know it's the reddish brown. The raw umber has just a little touch of black in it. And I streak little touches where I like it. It's mixing with the paint we put underneath. So anything you put on here dark will mix with the base color and becomes lighter. So you don't have to worry about getting the wrong, too much paint. You can always just touch down. And now I'm going to pinch wipe. Wish I was at my desk. This is a little bit crazy setup for me. Sorry, I'm fumbling. Okay, so I pinch wipe my brush. Now I'm going to go into my burnt umber. And oh no, I'm gonna first, I've gotten paint over here. Now I have to put the base coat down again. So I'm taking my base color and I'm going to use nice creamy paint. I'm going to paint inside the antlers. Now remember, if I cover over anything I want to see, you can always just touch it with your finger so you don't lose your line drawing because it's thicker paint. And I'm going to come all the way in between. You can use a smaller brush if it's easier for you. Okay, so now I've got wet paint. Remember, If the paint starts to pull, this is very smooth and creamy. If it starts to pull or drag or feel sticky, you have your extender right by your side in a little dish so you can moisten your brush, or you can moisten the brush. My paint was mixed earlier, so I can moisten my puddle and work it right into the paint, and it stays creamy. And I know the heritage paints stay wet for a good long while, but I'm not sure about all the different brands that people use. So my suggestion is you may be adding moisture um, more than we would have to, because this paint is really much easier to keep moist with the evaporating the water out. You're just adding extender in, so it might dry on you quicker. So I'm going to take a little burnt umber and I'm going to streak. I wanted this to kind of look a little bit like maybe woods in the background. Okay, maybe some trees. So a little burnt umber, a little raw umber. I wanted lights and darks in here. The center, I'm going to pick up white and I'm going to lighten in here. I want this to be the lightest part of the painting, right in between his antlers. Now, if you lose your antlers, you might want to find them again. I know I lost them once. I've painted this a couple of times. People like this design, so I've had to repeat it a couple of times. So you don't want to lose your shapes. So if you do, just push the paint off and you'll be able to see your line drawing underneath. Now I also have out my 3 yellows. Hansa yellow, yellow oxide, which looks like yellow ochre, and raw sienna. I'm going to take a little bit. I had paint in my brush, so it will mix. And I'm going to add, now, yellow oxide's a little too bright. That's not the Hansa, that's not the lightest one. Use raw sienna. It will be, there you go. That's more woodsy. And you can warm some areas with just little touches. Now, since I didn't like that yellow, I can also take a little base color, put on it again, or I can take a little bit more white and lighten it up. But I can lose color because it's wet. You can play with it. Okay, I'm going to come down again, moving all around. We're going around the painting, and I'm going to moisten again with my background color. It's kind of a sand color mix. Now I'll take a little bit more of my burnt umber, and I'm just wiping my brush out a little bit so I can get a little more color. And I'm streaking. This could be little trees maybe in the background, but don't put a lot of detail in. This should be very soft. This particular step gets put on soft, and the more you stroke it, the more it blends with that base color and you lose it. So alla prima is this style of wet on wet, and a rule of thumb, alla prima means one time through. So you put it on and in as few strokes as possible to get the job done. So you touch it you can see I'm moving very quickly out of the area once and done. Then you will not over blend it and lose all the pretty colors. And I'll touch a little highlight of white in here, maybe a little touch over here. And I'm down in the corner. I'm going to darken my corner with some pinch white my brush. Got to keep saying that to myself so I remember to tell you. Pinch white, streak again. Okay, if it starts dragging and feeling a little dry, that's when you'll pick up a little extender in your brush. Moisten it. Now these paints will stay wet quite a while. with extender in it. I can't be sure of how long yours will stay dry because I don't work with that paint. I started working with these paints probably a good 10 to 12 years ago, and they were such nice paints. There was no comparison. I couldn't do the things that I was shown that this could do with the other paints because they did dry so quickly. Okay. But getting a starter set, I do carry the starter set. It's 12 colors. I think we're working with 10 today. Um, I do sell them on my website, so they're always in stock. I can't live without the paints. So you can pick up a set. I think they're about 115, but you can go on my website. Don't quote me on that. Okay, I'm going to stroke some raw sienna over here. And I want lots of burnt umber over here. And so you can make these, and there's a couple of little nooks and crannies um, in between. You can take a smaller brush if you don't get color in there, and you can always add color that way. Okay, some background color in here. Almost around. And this is fun to do with any kind of a background, whether you slap the color in or you streak it in like this. It makes your backgrounds have some life to them, some movement, instead of a solid base coat. That can get a little boring. So I like to add these little touches. And we're going to do one more thing to our background. Now remember, I'm painting over on the side, so from time to time I may stick my head over and look at what I've done just to make sure I'm getting everything done properly. Okay, one more thing we're going to do. When you look at the foliage on here, if you look closely, there is some shadowing behind all that. Okay, so what we're going to do is take the pinch wipe your brush. You're going to get this light tan color out of your brush because now we need a dark color. Taking a little bit of pine green and raw umber. That's the darker one. I always brush mix. I like to get a variety of mixes, and I always just brush mix. And these paints are so concentrated, they go a long while. So we're looking for a darker green, okay? And we're going to be using extender. Now the extender not only keeps the paint wet, but it also thins the paint. So I'm just taking a little bit of extender on my brush, and I'm going to brush it into that little puddle on my palette. And that will keep it good and wet, but it thins it. We're going to do some little ghosty leaves, and the ghosty leaves are sheer. So adding the extender is going to make it a little sheer. Wipe my brush a little bit. I don't want too much paint. And I'm hoping these are still wet. I'm going to drop down to a smaller brush because we're doing a little bit more detail work. And let's grab this brush. Okay, so I'll pick up a little bit of this green touch. Now that's a little bit sharp green. I would like more brown in there, the raw umber, because it's in the background, so it should be very grayed down. And to do that, I've added earth tone to it. Ah, much better. So I'm going to lay in. Now, I'm going to use my finger because I like finger blending, and I can move it in softly. I'm going to tuck in a little dark in between the leaves. I might leave that. And I'm not going to do too much, but I want to see something going on. It's going to make it more dimensional because we're showing something behind the leaves. So we're adding another dimension to the painting. So just a few little touches of darks. Okay. And that will look like something's going on back there. We don't have to be real specific. Now this one's starting to dry, so I'm going to take just a clean brush that I have. Happens to be a flat brush. I'm going to dip it into my extender and very lightly, don't dig into the paint. Bring your brush handle down. Very lightly, I'm going to add a little bit of extender because this paint is moist, but I needed to be able to blend this a little bit. There we go. Now it's transparent. I can make it look like a few leaves. Okay, pinch wipe my brush and I can soften. When I say soften, my brush doesn't have a lot of paint. It still has residue of paint, but it doesn't apply more paint. I'm just using it as a feather duster. And then I can soften. I did over here with my finger, but when you want to use your brush, okay, gotta make sure, see this is a little wet. I didn't apply the extender over here, I should have. You can still add extender at any point and you can touch it down. So we just have something going on back there. Okay, a little bit of something. And we work that right into the wet background. Okay, now we're going to move on to our antlers. Now, this paint is kind of unique because when you buy the bottled acrylics, they have something in it called a binder, and the binder works like a glue. If you've ever gotten paint on your shirt and tried to get it off when it's dry, it's on there. It's glued on. Well, this paint does not have binder in it. Doesn't have any glue. So up here where I've covered, if I take and I do have a brush over here to show you this. If I take a little water brush, paint with a little water in it, not sopping wet, and I want to find where my antlers are, I can remove that paint because it's not going to dry probably for quite a few hours. But that's done with water. And I'm not painting with water, but I can remove. You see how I can find my pattern again? This is just a lazy painter in me where I don't feel like putting another pattern on, but I want to make sure I get a nice design and I like the way my antlers looked. So this is just a water brush, finding my shapes before I start putting the color on. So I just wanted to show you that if you've got a fingerprint or something on there, if you wet it with a little bit of water, the paint reconstitutes. That's because it has no binder in it, no glue. So you can take a day-old pattern or a palette that has paint still on it, wet it with a little bit of water, scrub it, and the paint will come back and become workable again. So that's another fun feature with these paints. You cannot do that with your other acrylics. Okay, so we're going to take a round brush this time. Let me just pick up a round brush. Which one? Here it is. Okay. And you go through a lot of paper towels because you'll be pinch wiping all the time. So just a heads up on that. I'm going to take my raw sienna, okay, and a little bit of white. Again, I'm brush mixing. And I'm looking for a soft creamy color. This is a little bit more yellow than our background, so we will see it. So we're looking for something like this. That's about right. And I'm going to use a round brush and I'm going to paint in the shapes of my antlers. Now I'm not going to do the whole thing because it will start to dry by the time I get down here to put my shading in. So I'm going to do a portion of it. I might pick 3 little points, paint them in, and then I'll do my shading and highlighting. So I'm going to offload my brush, pinch wipe, And I'm going to go into my burnt umber. I have burnt umber in this corner here. And this is my shadow color. And if you notice on your antlers, you can refer to your picture. You have a light background and then you have dark touches. So this one, the shadow is at the bottom. So I'm depositing paint. Notice I'm not doing any blending. I am depositing paint. I want a little at the corner. And I'm going to put a bit more down below. Okay, I'm depositing paint. Now on this next antler here, I think I added an antler. Oh well. He'll be a little bit different than all the rest. Okay, now I pinch wipe my brush into my paper towel. Now when I pinch wipe, I squeeze. And when you pull it out, your pointy brush has now become a paddle. So now I can take that little paddle and I can soften my paint. Because the paint is wet underneath, you can softly blend. This is where it works like an oil paint. The wet into the wet. And I keep squeezing and pinching my brush. If I get too much paint on it, it won't blend. Pinch it again. And I just soften. Yeah, I definitely think I added an extra horn. I'm not sure, but it's okay. If you made your shape too wide, which I think I did right here, I'm going to take some of the underneath color, lay it in, pinch wipe, soften it into the background, and that's taken care of. Now I didn't blend this one as much. I could up in here, and that looks nice. We're going to add a highlight to this one. Before we go to the next one, we're going to work while this is wet. We're going to work on this one. So I put in the base color, the shadow, and now I'm adding little touches, depositing some white paint into areas I would like it to be a highlight. And maybe this one here. Deposited the paint, and I'll come in a little closer as long as my leg stays here so you can see. And pinch wipe, soften it in. If you like the way it looks, you don't touch it. If it needs softening on one side, you just touch it a little bit. Very, very simple paint. Okay, now I'm going to take some of the next color and I'll paint this part of the antler in. And this one comes all the way down. And we pick up the next antler, which will come over to the side. And then there's one more coming out over here. So make sure you cover over that brush mix that we did when we brush sketched, I mean. Okay, now we've got that color in. Now I'm going to take some of my burnt umber to shade again. And this is on the left side. Deposit the paint. Deposit the paint because it's wet. I'm going to lay it down. I'm going to pinch wipe and I'll soften it in. Little piece of fuzz in here. Let's take that. Ah, can't get it out. Let's pinch wipe. There, got it. Soften the edges. You're not touching the outside edge where you laid the paint. You're only touching where it's blending with the next color. We want it to blend with that base mix. So I'm touching the side of the base mix. Now, if it starts to feel dry, I can always moisten my brush with a little extender and soften again. And then I look at it and I say, okay, now we need a little bit more dark. And that's starting to set. The more you spread the paint out, it will start to dry and start to set. So now I can add some extra dark touches. And down at the base of the antlers is darker. So I can lay in a little bit more dark. And then I'll soften that up here and pull it up, or you can pull the light down into the dark, either way. And these they're kind of wood grainy, these antlers. They're not real smooth, so you don't have to try to smooth a totally smooth. It's not satin ribbon. It's a choppy little antler. Okay, and I'm going to go over to the other side now. If I think it got a little dark, I can take some of my first color and lay that back in if I wanted to do that. I'd like to add some white highlight down on these tips a little bit, just the top edges. I think that looks pretty. Pinch wipe and soften it in. Soften it in. And you'll find painting this way, you can get a lot of painting done in a shorter amount of time because you don't have to wait till it dries. You're not side loading, you're just laying the color in, which seems to go a little bit quicker. Let's put a streak of highlight down there. Okay. We'll move over to the other one and we'll use the raw sienna mixed with the white. And we're going to find this antler, maybe. There it is. When I'm painting over on the side, I can't see the line drawing as clearly as I do when I'm right on top of it. So forgive me if it doesn't come out as perfect as I would like. It will come out pretty anyway. So we'll put in and I did the top three, and there's a little one coming off to the side here. Picking up, pinch wipe the brush. I'm picking up my shadow color. That's the burnt umber, depositing the paint where I would like it. And you just have to know how much shadow you want, how much highlight you want, and it will all come together nicely. Okay, pinch wipe my brush. Soften that edge. Okay, now we have an antler that is crossing over top of the other ones. So I'll paint that one in. And it's going to leave a little tiny keyhole opening of that should be background color. But we still have our background mix on our palette and it's still wet. So we can easily, if it's starting to dry, you can easily put a little water in there or a little extender and you'll be able to paint that little keyhole in. Okay, so I've got that in and pick up my burnt umber, and we're going to place the shadow in. Oh, let's see. One, two, okay, this one gets this shadow. And on this one, and I'll soften those in. Just wipe so you get a paddle. I find it easier to soften and blend when you've got a little bit wider brush. If it's a point, you can't move the paint around very nicely. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to darken this area right in here, putting my finger in the background. It's still wet. Darken that. Soften out the edges. I don't want lines showing, so that's why I soften. We don't want a stripe to form. So we soften, blend it in a little bit. Okay. Add a little bit of a highlight, taking white. Now, it doesn't go on white because you've softened it into the undercolor. So it blends. So we're going to go up here. A little here. I want this one to be lighter to show that it's on top. Soften. So it's mixing with that creamy color. So you get an off-white. You don't get pure white. If it were pure white, it would start looking like the snow, and we want the snowflakes to be the most important. So I'm going to make sure I don't get too white. Okay, now that little keyhole I was talking about that needs a little background color. Just take a little bit of the background color and we'll paint that in. Okay, I think I need just a little more shading on this one. Now, after this paint sets up, you can always add a little bit darker value, and it won't be mixing with the background because that'll start to dry. So if you need extra darks, you can come back in with them, and you'll get them. This antler goes all the way down underneath that holly leaf. So I'm going to put in some dark right in here because it flows down in and it curves inwards. And this one needs to curve down into this as well. Okay, so let's go down into heading towards the head area. I think that one's up a little high. Okay. All right, so that is what I did for the antlers. Oh, there's one other thing. I took a little bit of my red. We have a red in our palette. And I'm going to mix a little bit of burnt umber into my red so it's not fire engine red. We don't want, if I put fire engine red on his antlers, it would look like he gored an animal. And we're not going to have that. So it's got a little bit of burnt umber into it. So it's more heading towards burgundy, but it's still red. And I put just a little bit of extender in my brush so my paint will slide. And I went up to this antler up here and we tinted a little bit of red into that antler and a little bit over here. Now, the reason we're doing this is we're going to have a red hat, red berries. So I've put a little bit of the red tint. We're going to have some red in the ears. We have the red stars. So we're carrying the red color throughout the painting. Makes it more harmonious. So just those little tiny red touches will help. So that's why we did that red. Okay, now we're going to move down. I think we'll put on our little red cap. Let me just grab my little brush for that. Okay, I'm going to be using about a 6 or an 8 filbert, and we're going to take our nice bright red. I didn't mix anything into this. I'm going to keep it bright red. Paint's been sitting out for a little while, so I'm just dressing it, adding just a little touch of extender, mixing it into my puddle. I put these paints out earlier so they start to get sticky on the top. So we're going to find our red cap. Find the red cap. You can go along this hat. I cut into the hat a little bit. And I went around my holly leaf. And then there's a portion of the hat on this side that's hanging down. Paint that in. Okay, now we have a red hat, but we need some shading. So in order to make a burgundy, I'm going to take a little bit of my ultramarine blue and a little bit of my red. Just a touch of the blue. You need more red than blue. It will turn to a deeper color red easily. Okay. Now we're going to shadow a couple of areas. The first area is right under the holly leaf. Okay, you can see there's a little color change there. It's a little darker red. Keep it red, don't turn it blue. And then down the side of the, I'll call that the streamer area. It hangs down and across where the fur touches the red. Now I've just deposited paint, right? I have not blended. Little dash up here. And we're going to do a dash of color where the fold over. We're not, now these areas all have hard edges. So I've deposited the paint. I'm going to pinch wipe the same brush. It's going to form kind of a paddle. And now I'm going to soften those edges. We don't want to see a line or a stripe. If you pull the color out into the red background, you won't have a harsh stripe. Go across the hat area. It just softens right into the wet paint. Go around the edge. Don't go into the middle because the middle is the right. We want that there, but we don't want to see a line. So we just touch it. And here, we don't want to see a line. And it's very feather touch. You don't want, if you are using the brush this way, you dig and you dig and you dig. But if you lower your brush handle, just instead of this position, you lower it down and you very lightly touch, pulling the handle lower, you'll softly pull across the paint when you do your blending instead of gouging and digging because your handle is way up. So that's just a little tip to help you with blending. Okay. Now the hat, that's all we're going to do with the shading. Now we'll take just a little bit of the red and we're going to put white into it. We're going to make a pink. Oops, there we go. Little pink. Okay, not much. We don't need a lot of this. We're going to highlight a couple areas. The highlight is going to be in this area and on the right side of that piece hanging down. So I deposit my paint and I'll deposit the paint on this side. Now I pinch wipe my brush, right? And now I'm going to soften that. Okay, so now it's lighter on that side. Now I would like this to, now I don't want to carry it out real far. So I'm just going to lightly go around the center, or not the center, around the outer edge. There we go. The more you play with it, the more it's going to turn red. You won't keep a highlight. Now, if you lose it, you can always come back, put it in again if you have to, but try to do it in one shot where you've just softened around the outside of it. Okay, so that's a little lighter, and there's a little lighter. That's all we're going to do. If you look at the hat, you don't look at that shadow, you look at that sparkly snow on top. So that's all we need to do for that shading, is just to put a little bit of shadow on this side. Okay. All right, now we're going to go to let's do our green leaves. I'm going to need to get another paper towel. You go through a lot of paper towels. I should have taken stock in the paper towel company. Okay, you're going to be using the pine green, and we're going to lighten that pine green with a little bit of yellow oxide. That's not the, it looks like yellow ochre. It's the lighter, not the bright yellow, not the darker gold. The other one is called yellow oxide. And I think when I used to paint with Delta paints, I think I used to call it antique gold. Yeah, I think they did. It's hard to remember. Each paint company has their own name for everything, all the colors, they make you crazy. Okay, you can use a round brush to get into the points. You can use a flat brush if you prefer, or you can use a filbert. Whatever you want to do, we are going to do each little leaf to completion. You'll put the base color on, you'll put a shadow color in, and you will put a highlight, and then it will be finished. And then you can go to the next leaf. I do this so that that color does not dry before I'm finished. The dark mix will be your pine green plus ultramarine blue. So we have a nice dark. Now you need to know a little bit about where place leaves are kind of tricky. And a holly leaf, okay, we'll give you a quick little holly leaf shape. And there's the stem coming into the holly leaf. There is what they call a T-zone. And the T-zone is the shadow area going up the vein and at the base of the leaf. You see how it makes kind of a T? Okay. Now, every leaf in nature is different. You have some rounder leaves, and you have, of course, the holly leaf shape. So when you have a rounder leaf, okay, let's say you have a leaf more like this, the stem would come in here. Your T-zone on this leaf is, of course, the vein area, never a line, but an area of color. And then it goes this way for the T-zone. So a T-zone is where the stem comes in, and that's usually shadowed. And that's the way I like to paint my leaves. And you can have maple leaves, you can have persimmon trees, whatever you have, they all have a T-zone in the leaf. Okay, so we are going to take our shadow color and we're going to find the T-zone so we know where to put our shadow. Okay, so the shadow area will go in the vein area, never all the way to the point because that cuts the leaf into two pieces, cuts it right in half, and that doesn't look really pretty. And wherever the base of that is. That's a little bit hidden behind the hat. So your T area will be a little bit obscured. Now I'm pinch wiping my brush. And because I was talking, this is probably drying a little. There we go. So we'll blend the T-zone softly. So you know where your shadow is. And then we're going to put a highlight in. And the highlight I'm going to be using will be your Hansa yellow. So I deposit where I would like my highlight to be. I'd like it to be on that side. Pinch wipe, and now I'll soften. Okay, and the last thing you will do is taking a liner brush, and we'd like to have a little bit of a vein area. And because the paint is wet, it sometimes blends right into the shadow color and disappears. If it doesn't, I help it by pinching the brush and going back. That one worked out very nicely, so we won't have to do anything to it. Now I will take my mix again, my base mix. That's the pine green and a little bit of yellow ochre, and I'll find the next leaf. This is a small one over here. Okay. And since I have paint on my brush, I'm going to put in 2 of them. It's best to start slowly until you get the hang of leaves with just 1 leaf at a time. But I've painted a couple leaves so I can show you 2 at the same time. But you want to keep it wet, so you've got to think thick and creamy paint. If you spread them out too far and they start to dry, you're not going to get a nice blend. So that's the, okay, vein area. Hit the T-zone down at the base. Vein area. T-zone. Pinch wipe. And I'll blend. You just don't want a fine area like we have over here. You don't want a fine vein line. You want a wider area. And we'll blend this one. If you lose it, now I just blended that and I didn't put enough paint the first time. That happens. Do it again. Just put it down and softly blend. And then I'll soften the base with the T-zone. And then I'm going to put in highlight. Like this side next to the hat to be highlighted. And maybe a little bit up here. That probably isn't enough paint on that one. And then I'll soften it in. If your highlight isn't enough the first time, you can always go back and spice it up a little bit more with a little more color. If you feel your leaf got too dark, you can do that. Also, when we get down here, I'll show you how to tint leaves. Sometimes you have a burnished edge, a little bit of brown, and we'll do that on this side. And then sometimes you have maybe some blue tints. Okay, now I'll pull the vein into the wet paint. And it softens it because it's going into wet paint. It's blending. It's not a harsh white or pale green line. It softens it right into there. If you don't get enough, you can always, I usually go right into the center and I can pep up my center without going down into the shadow area if you need to. You can always brighten them up, but don't go neon on those. Okay, we'll go down here. We have 3 more. Oh, yeah, we got that one. 3 more leaves. Okay, I'm using the same base mix. And that's the pine green and a little bit of yellow oxide to lighten the leaf. And there's a lot of combinations of colors with leaves, so this is not the only one you can use. You can use a lot of different ones. If you started putting a color on a leaf like this and the phone rings and you say, oh dear, I just base coated that in. By the time I get back, talking to Auntie M, by the time you get back, it's all dried. Just reapply the color and you can start again. And it only takes a minute because you've already got the first layer down. It'll go in quickly for you. And we all know we get interruptions. They always seem to find us when we're painting. Because the only time we sit still, I think. Okay, I've got 2 leaves in there. And this time I'm going to get my shadow color. Put that in my T-zone area. Okay. And this is a little larger leaf, so it'll be easier to see the T-zones. Does look like little T's. Okay, now I'm going to take this. I'm going to put a lot of paint in here. I'm going to have to blend a little bit more. And I'll soften this edge. I don't go down the middle. I go down the side of each one of these to soften it. Okay, and we're going to take a little bit of our Hansa yellow, and I'm going to have this top edge. The sun's coming down, so it's hitting the top edges of the leaves. Maybe a little touch here, a little touch there, just for fun. These are bigger leaves, so we can do a few more touches. Okay, bring that highlight. Soften those edges. And I wanted a little bit of color here, so I just lightened that side a little. Now on here, let's say I wanted to have a blue tint, make these a little different from this one. I take a little bit of my ultramarine blue and I just lay in a patch of color, and then I'll soften it so that this leaf has a little more blue than the other one, a little bluer. And over here, I'm going to tint and I'm going to use a little bit of brown so it's a little different. Oh, I know what we're missing. I always, for my students, I always turn on nice background music, and I forgot to turn it on this morning. So let's do that. Your science. And playing background music, scientifically proven that it opens up the left side of the brain. And so you're using your whole brain to do your painting and your designing. So it's a good thing. Now I've put the highlight on before I even put the shadow on. Is that a problem? No. You can do either or. And you can do them all at once too, if you feel that's easier. And then I'll come back. I'll blend. Both edge so that my highlight is noticeable. If it's too bright, you just have to tap it a little bit and work it into the leaf. Now, if you would like to tint your leaf, I'm going to take a little bit of my burnt umber, maybe a touch of red into that. And I'm going to put a little tint on this edge. I love to do the tints. They look so pretty. And then I'll blend that so the leaf has a little tint. And it doesn't have to always be on the edge. You can do a little tint in the center as well. Oops, I didn't clean my brush off enough. This one's starting to dry. That's why it's a good idea to put all the colors you're going to put on and blend before you go to the next leaf. It's a little more work because it's starting to dry. You can do it, but it's a little more playtime. But see, you can do fun little tints on your leaves as well. I didn't do too much on that one. Okay, we have one leaf up in here. I know you can't really see it. I covered it, but there's a little skinny leaf coming up this way. So I just sketched, because the paint's wet, I just used the handle of my brush and made myself a line in here. So I'm gonna take my mix. I'm adding a little bit of blue to this mix. Got a little bit more blue in the background because it's a back leaf, so I thought I'd cool it down with a little blue. Just a little different than the others. And we have this leaf. And I'll take my same shadow color. And this is going to have a long T area. The T-zone. Softening. Okay. And take my highlight color. And this time I'm going to do the highlight a little bit different. I'm going to use my base color plus a little white. So it'll make a light green, but it's not going to be using the yellow. I'm going to use a light green. And I'm going to put the color on the outside edge. It's a paler green, maybe a little more white. Everyone knows therapy is great for solving problems, but it turns out I'm going to do it on both edges. And then we're going to pull towards the vein area, making it look like little feeder veins. In kind of a, I'm going to say like a little stripy fashion. A little different. Okay, so that one looks a little bit different than the others. And then you can put in bit of a vein, add extender so your paint flows off your brush nicely. Okay, I think we have some leaves. Now, hearing the Beach Boys, it makes me want to get up and dance a little. If you need to get up and stretch, good song to stretch to. Okay, we're going to work on our ears. We do each element separately because if we start base coating the whole thing, it'll all be dry and we have to do it all over again. So we're going to start this little section over here on this ear. I'm using my filbert brush and burnt umber, and I'm going to put in the shape of my ear. And there's a little tiny piece next to his head that's also part of the ear. Don't forget that little tiny area back there. And I'm going to pinch wipe my brush. And this time we're going to use the darker brown, the raw umber. And we're going to, there was a little line in here to show you where the inside of the ear was. We're going to pull this darker brown inside the ear. Make it a little darker, all the way down the bottom corner. We're going to put things in there so it won't be that noticeable, but you'll shadow next to the hat a little bit, good and dark. All right. Now I'm going to take some of that red mix that we mixed up a few minutes ago to do that little tint on that leaf, and that's the red plus a little bit of burnt umber. And I'm going to tint his ear. I got an awful lot in there. I'll take that down a little bit. I'm just going to take my extender and I'll soften that. He gets a little bit of a tint on the top of his ear. Don't really want too much of a line to form there, so I'll soften it. And while that paint is wet, I'm going to be using a round brush. This is, I think, like a number 4 round. And I'm going to take my, if you still have some of your base mix, you can use that, what we base coated the cardboard or the canvas with. Or you can take your white and just put just a little tint of maybe a little raw sienna in it, just like a dirty white, or a little burnt umber in it, any one of your colors, just so it's not stark white. That can be a little bit hopping off the board bright. And we're going to give him the effect of a few hairs coming out of his ear. Now, they're awful liney, and he's about probably 6 to 10 feet away from us. So we can't see the little tiny hairs in his ear, but we can see a lighter color. So I pinch wipe my brush and I'll soften that. So there's a little bit of white in there. You can feel that that's going to be ear hair. And maybe I'll pull 1 or 2 that might look like a follicle of hair. You can also, because too many will ruin it, you can also take some of your burnt umber and make a space. So there's not all hair all the way down. So we just put a little bit of dark back in there. So that will work. Okay, we're going to take our burnt umber on the other ear, and we're going to find our little ear here going around our little holly leaf. And now we have to know where his face is. So face goes out. It's kind of rounded on the side of his head, the temple. We'll put in the burnt umber. Now we're going to take our raw umber. It's the really dark one. And instead of being dark in the middle, now we're going to darken the outside edge. Brush is getting all sticky. 1 minute. Got to keep adding extender to your piles because they've been sitting out for an hour or so and they start to get tacky. So I am just moistening my puddle, brush mixing a little bit of extender, and you got to go easy. You can't do a lot of extender because if you do a lot, you end up with sheer paint and it won't cover. Okay, so I'm going to darken this portion of the ear. And then we're going to darken down this side and next to his head. So we're kind of leaving an area open. Okay, I'm going to pinch wipe and I'll soften that a little bit. Okay, now we're going to take a little bit of our pink mix. If you don't have pink on your palette, mix your red with white and you'll get a nice peachy pink. And we're going to lay a little bit of this pink color into his ear in the center. Just a small amount, don't need a lot. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit of the pink over here because that red seemed to get dark. Just a little touch of the pink. Okay, now we've got ears done. We're going to jump to our fur. We have fur here and a fur on his tassel on his hat. We need to mix up our raw sienna and white, make a cream color. In order to get white for fur, you have to have shading behind it. And that means otherwise it would be white, white on white, white, more white, and there'd be no texture to it at all. So we have to start out with a creamy color. That's raw sienna and white. And we're going to paint this in. It's a little narrower on the right side. And we're going to have a little bit of this. Okay, and you're going to do this as well.
Hi, we're Comparion Insurance Agency. Never heard of us? We know. But to help it stick that our local agents are insurance experts, we're going to say local agent 3 times in the next 5 seconds. Local agent, local agent, local agent.
Find us at comparioninsurance.com.
Yeah, so we've got a little pom-pom there. Mine kind of grew a little, but that's okay. Okay, now we're going to pinch wipe your brush and you're going to pick up some white. And we're going to, with a dabbing fashion, you're going to lay in some white paint. Now, when you take the white and you put it on top of this, it's going to blend and make a lighter tan. It's not going to look white yet. but that's a good thing. We want some of this tan. We'll start changing the color gently. Okay. And, oh, I went too far down. Sorry. I'll redo that. Don't go down to this bottom edge. Leave a little bit of that tan color to be the shadow. I went a little too far down. Sorry about that. Okay, so you're bringing your white up here, and you'll come down almost touching the edge. Leave a little band of that tan. And in your pom-pom, you're going to leave a little band of the tan showing through on the lower edge. Now, because white takes a little bit of time to dry, I'm going to give it a minute. And we'll come back and we'll let that set up a little bit. See, I'm just softening, pinch wipe, soften that, so you have that edge. We'll brighten that up again. We're going to give it just a minute, and that will start to set up. It's thick paint right now, so it'll take a minute, and then we'll be able to highlight that again. Okay, while we're waiting on that, we'll start putting in you paint in his little eyes. We're going to use raw umber. Now, everybody's raw umber in the different paint lines are different shades. If your raw umber is very, very dark, then this will work. If not, add a speck of black to your paint. My raw umber is really nice and dark. So we're going to paint in little eyes. And I'll show you that up close. It's an arch over the top and just an arch down below. Okay. I am also going to paint in a little nose. And the nose is just an arch over top, arch down below, and almost straight on the sides. It starts looking like a cow about now. And I'm thinking I got a little wide, so I might shave off a little bit of that. Hopefully you haven't done it yet. But this should come back a little bit further. I think it'll be prettier if it's not so wide. Let's take a little bit of that off. That looks about correct on that side, but this is a little too far over. Now, let me get in front of it so I can see if he's straight or is he. Just see what I did here. Oh yeah, he's real lopsided. Okay, let's fix the nose. Let's fix him. Yeah, all right. I think that's okay. Now in the eyes, you're going to do a little bit of white highlight. This is done with a liner. The round brush is probably too big, so a liner will work. And he gets a dash. A little dash in this bottom corner. 2 dots. And this one gets a little dash. And this one gets 1 dot. Okay, we're going to, I think my nose, is that nose too wide? I have to look. Yeah, my nose got a little tall. And if you don't get your shape right the first time, it probably won't be real happy. So I'm shaving off a little bit of nose on the top. I think it got wide. And you can take your pattern out and lay it on top and look to make sure your pattern is the way you want it before you do it. Okay, the nose gets a little dash across his little nose with some white. And we're going to put in 2 nostrils. Now this is a very dark brown, so you're going to have to use black to do this. And if your brown is a little lighter, you'll see the black, but if it is dark, you probably won't see it until we do the highlighting step. And I didn't take black out. Well, let's see. And it's just a dash on either side for the nostrils. You really don't see the black all that much. I can hardly see it. So then when you take your liner brush with that white in it, I'm going to go a little dash under that where I just did the little bit of black. And because it's wet, it's soft.
Hi, we're
A
comparing
little more
insurance
paint
agency.
so I can
Right
see
now,
it. It blends into the wet paint. But we want to see these 2 little curves. And then pinch wiping my brush so I don't have a lot of paint in my liner. I'm going to go right down the center. Oh, I did have paint in it. If I squeeze it out good, and it just has a little tiny bit of paint in it, I can put a soft mark here. Unfortunately, the first stroke I did had a lot of paint, so I'm gonna settle it down. You can do the same if you got too much with a little raw umber, just softening that down because we want this soft. There, like a whisper on his nose, just a little bit. And then there's 2 more little whispers. One here and one here underneath. Okay, now our fur up above should be tacked up a little bit. So now when I take my white, it should, there we go. I should be able to get some nice bright white. Now, when you put this in, leave some airspace of the beige showing through a little bit. I'm using thicker paint. Not going to go along this bottom edge. Blend it, but you don't want it to go out to that edge. And I'll go over to my little pom-pom and I'll lighten that up too. Pinch wipe my brush. And on the bottom, we need to soften this edge right here. This forms a line and that doesn't look as pretty. So just patting it. Use a little extender if it's too harsh. Softening. Okay. If I lost it, I wanted it a little bit on this side. I can put a little bit back in if you have to. And I did lose a corner of it, so. Good. All right. Now we just have some fur to work on. Okay, we're gonna do the fur with burnt umber. Oh, hold on a minute. I think, I'm not sure, but I think I have to stop the video and break. Okay, we're gonna stop right here and we'll break for lunch. And then you'll get the next video to finish him. So that's where we're gonna finish right now. I've got all the leaves finished. We'll come back in and we'll do all the detail fur and the stars. So we're going to have a little break and we'll come back. See you in a few minutes.